gave a couple minutes there for people to join in, but I think we're going to get going now and get started. So appreciate you all coming. My name is Evan Rue. I'm an expert services consultant at aPriori. Today's session I'll be covering on best practices for capacity management and material planning. I'm joined by Elliot Wiegman, who's also an expert services consultant with aPriori, and he will be acting as the moderator for this session. So he'll be fielding any questions you have or any other information throughout the session. So just before we get started, I wanted to take a moment and introduce myself. As I said earlier, my name is Evan Rue. I'm an expert services consultant with aPriori. In this role, I work with our customers to execute on their aPriori deployment from a technical perspective to help them best utilize the tool. I joined aPriori at the start of this year from a dual master's degree program at Boston University. My previous experience in the manufacturing industry came from the environmental and process engineering space in pressure-sensitive tape manufacturing. And just some summation of the topic we're going to cover today, I'll be covering how to use the robustness of aPriori data in order to solve business challenges beyond should costs, such as analyzing material planning, understanding capacity restrictions, and justifying capital expenditures. And this is the following is our agenda for this session. I'll start with a brief introduction of the topic and review the objectives that I'm hoping you'll get out of today's session. And then I'll discuss material risk analysis, capacity risk planning, dive into capital expenditure analysis, and at the end of the session, do a brief live demo in Cost Insight reporting tool to kind of display what the UI of that looks like and how you can kind of navigate and see some data in there. After all of these topics, we will open the call to any questions that we have as time allows. So for many of you who are familiar with using aPriori, you should be experienced with using aPriori should cost, cycle time, and design to cost data on select parts in order to understand where potential savings and opportunities may lie. In today's discussion, I want to be covering how the use of aPriori data can be generated from groups of parts with a more macro mindset from a couple different perspectives. So I will touch on how aPriori part data can be leveraged in forecasting annual material consumptions, understanding risk associated with material demands, how to review per part cycle times to quantify internal capacity restrictions and requirements, and finally, how to justify machine investments, investigate make versus buy decisions, and complete introductory ROI investigations within any capital expenditure projects that you may have going on. So those are the goals for this session, and we are going to start off running through material risk analysis. So in planning raw material ordering or requirements for a specific project or programs, it is first necessary to understand the annual material demand for these projects. This annual demand will drive your purchasing decisions across the board, which will ultimately drive the success of specific projects. As we've seen over the last year, the future can be unpredictable and pretty turbulent. So by generating and evaluating material demands early in projects, you can be able to understand where you are most at risk from a reliability or availability perspective within material ordering. By identifying risk areas early on, you will be able to plan around these possibilities, whether this be identifying low use materials for redesign, high cost or high volume materials to generate multiple supplier options, or to evaluate material order quantities to most efficiently order. You can utilize aPriori data to generate multiple scenarios to understand all possible outcomes for your raw material demands. In completing these activities, we can reduce the risk of material shortages and reduce the risk of overpaying for required raw material quantities to ensure we get the best cost or have the best price for select materials. This approach to material risk is applicable for sourcing and quoting individuals with slightly different approaches while using aPriori data. So over the next couple slides, I'm going to just go into a little bit of the definition of really how we would use a priori data in achieving and reducing these risks. First, I'll cover this topic from a sourcing perspective. As your company develops new products, you will likely begin to source parts from various suppliers to evaluate the cost, the quality, and the risk associated with each one of those suppliers. With using a priori data and evaluating their should cost data, you can also utilize a priori, or you can utilize geometry and material characteristics to quantify both material usage and cost for each individual piece part. By generating all the data for a new product, you will be able to leverage a priori in calculating the annual material demands for various scenarios. With this data on hand, you can quickly review for opportunities that may exist to reduce risk. By identifying low-use materials, you may want to explore material alternatives in order to remove high-cost specialty materials from your RFQs, which may be difficult to order. If you have substantial use of a specific material, both on a cost or weight basis, it may be beneficial for you to explore consolidating these parts to a supplier where you've sourced the material before. This will increase reliability in your purchasing, and you may also be able to drive down material pricing and reduce the material costs of your new parts. Finally, with a priori in hand, the ability to share annual material requirements upfront for an entire RFQ will help have an open line of communication to ensure these demands can be met by your suppliers. Overall, by leveraging data generated in a priori, you can begin making more fact-based decisions in your material consumptions and your material planning. From the quoting perspective, a priori data can provide the ability to quickly reevaluate an entire bid package to eliminate risk if not meeting the bid request. By generating material usage information in a priori, you can immediately determine the material requirements for an incoming RFQ. With this data and knowledge of your internal processes, you can understand what materials would pose a risk to meeting the bid requirements. Whether these risks come from unachievable material cost numbers driving the costs of the parts down, or specialty materials you will have a difficult time accessing or sourcing, or specific parts you may need to outsource due to material concerns. With a priori, you will have all the data necessary at your fingertips. Additionally, when a bid package is won, you can use a priori to quickly evaluate your new company-wide annual material consumption data. With this data, material ordering quantities can be reevaluated in an attempt to drive down material costs and add to the overall contribution margin of these parts, which will in turn drive up profits. With this data, quoting organizations can reduce the risk that arises from any material in a select bid package. So let's take the following example situation. You are reviewing a relationship with raw material suppliers and want a deeper understanding of the information on the risk for select materials across your entire plant and identify some opportunities for consolidating these materials to a preferred supplier. In this scenario, we're going to look at a report that has been generated from our Cost Insight reporting tool, where relevant data can be evaluated, and we can begin to identify some of the areas where material risk is present in the package of parts. So this is an example of a report surrounding material risk analysis that has been generated using a priori's ad hoc reporting tool. For a group of parts, we can quickly visualize annual material usages and costs in order to start investigating some opportunities we have discussed in the previous slides. From a priori should cost output, using raw material costs, part mass, annual volumes, we can quickly determine the data provided in this table. If this data was all of your raw material ordering across a select program or a select project, you can quickly quantify the raw material mass requirements and cost requirements for this project. On the left-hand side of this table, you'll see the material names that exist in the parts we have evaluated. For each of these material names, material data usage has been added up, and Depending on the material pricing, we've quantified annual material costs for each of these material types. Beyond that, with aPriori's ability to calculate rough and finished masses based on geometry, we can start to look at some scrap information to determine and investigate opportunities for possible part redesigns to decrease the spend on scrap rates and save some hidden dollars. So as shown here in the column that has been highlighted, aPriori can point you to data to use for MOQs and high mass materials, which you may want to investigate multiple supplier options to reduce the risk as a high volume part. So in this specific column, we're trying to determine the quantities of mass used under each of these different materials within our plant. And with this data, for materials in this table, such as the ABS, which is the top one in the column, or possibly the aluminum stock 1050A, you can see that we have significantly high usage of those materials compared to other materials in this plant. This data can drive us to kind of reevaluating material ordering quantities or establishing a more firm supply base for these types of raw materials to ensure that our high use materials we will not run out of, or we won't run into a situation where we will not have access to those materials. In a similar evaluation, with aPriori's material cost data based on those material usages, we can determine our annual material spend for all the parts within a specific project or program. So, like quantities, this spend can help you identify high usage materials, which may lead you to investigate material alternatives and cheaper materials. In this column, I have outlined Inconel and ABS, and we can see have a significant amount of spend associated with them. So when you're evaluating your parts as a whole and your raw material ordering as a whole, materials such as those two where the spend is incredibly high might be something you want to take a look at to see if you can consolidate your ordering quantities or possibly find multiple suppliers so you can reduce your risk and ensure that you have the availability to purchase all the materials you will need. An additional example of an opportunity within this report is to identify low usage specialized materials that you may want to focus on a redesign for. In this example, we have a nylon that we use a significantly less amount than the rest of the materials here. So the parts that fall under this nylon might be something we want to investigate redesigning or finding material alternatives for to ensure that we're getting a solid material cost instead of maybe overspending for low cost or low volume, low usage materials. And lastly, as I stated earlier, with aPriori's ability to quantify rough and finish masses, you can evaluate scrap for specific material parts and material types. So data points like the ones I highlighted in the middle of the screen, where we are sending almost 50% of our material to a scrap rate, might be something we want to investigate parts of that process or that material to understand why our material utilization is so low. Through redesigns or material changes, we may be able to pull away some of this scrap material mass, and on the column all the way to the right, start to carve into some of those scrap material costs and achieve additional savings with redesigns. With aPriori's ability to intelligently view material data across any mix of parts, you as either a sourcing or a quoting professional can have access to the data that helps you reduce your material risk from a number of approaches, which will allow you to be confident in both agreements with suppliers and winning competitive bid packages. So by looking at the data that we can provide with aPriori out of our should costs, we can start to drive some of these annual material consumption reports and identify some of the risk areas and begin to attack them and ensure we have sufficient materials to provide what we need. Next section I'm going to cover is on capacity risk planning. So an additional area that commonly poses risks to product manufacturing companies is capacity restrictions. So with aPriori's ability to calculate very reliable cycle times, you can intelligently generate annual capacity requirement reports. By being able to quickly adjust process selections, aPriori presents you the opportunity to explore the most efficient processes to manufacture a specific part. Additionally, understanding your own internal capabilities and capacities, you can select processes where select parts may be made to evaluate cost implications of those selected processes. When the final processes and machines are determined for a select part, parts should cost, you can understand the breadth of capacity requirements across all machines required to make that select part to ensure you or your suppliers are capable of manufacturing it. With this information in hand, you can quickly ensure that you have the available capacity for selected parts to ensure on-time delivery. When you do encounter areas of capacity restraints, you can use aPriori in the data to evaluate additional processes to identify new machines to leverage in order to eliminate the risk of overbooking selected machines. To leverage aPriori in assisting you to complete capacity planning evaluations, you can quickly adjust processes and equipment to ensure that you are utilizing the proper machines for a minimum should cost. When the final processes are identified and utilizing annual volumes that have been entered, along with aPriori cycle times, you can accurately determine a specific capacity requirement for all processes and equipment on a specific part. Moreover, by using existing parts in aPriori's database, the same data can be evaluated on a plant-wide basis to generate current capacity restrictions. By comparing your new part demand with your existing usage, you can rapidly ensure whether the capacity is available in your plant for those selected new parts. With all this data in hand, the capacity risk is easily understandable, as is the opportunity to eliminate this risk. If capacity is constrained on the selected processes, you can evaluate new processes or choose to outsource select parts to free up internal capacities. If you are generating an RFQ for new parts, you can provide suppliers with the capacity requirements of those parts, and this will help ensure you are utilizing the lowest cost machines with your suppliers and allows your suppliers to quickly reply to bids while considering capacity in their response. So as it relates to capacity planning, we're going to take on this specific scenario. So let's say you receive a bid package of 14 parts and are asked to understand if current and internal capacity is sufficient to provide all the parts on time to the customer. And again, we're going to look at a cost insight report that has been generated from our ad hoc viewer and point out some valuable information that you can generate and have at your fingertips when using aPriori. So you've generated the data in aPriori using the optimum processes to drive should cost down, and now you want to understand the capacity requirements of those specific parts. A table like this can be put together to view that data in a succinct way. So on the left-hand side of the table, you'll see a group of parts that we are evaluating, each listed by their part number. And across the table, above on the top, you'll see various machines that can be utilized and different processes when making these parts. So the data in this table represents the hours of capacity on each of these machines by taking aPriori calculated cycle times and batch setup times and multiplying them by annual volumes to determine the hours required on each of these machines. So for example, on the first line item here on this part would require about 88 hours of required time on the 800 kilonewton press force machine and about 47 hours per year on a turret press machine. So this information is a quick way to pull out the cycle time data from aPriori and look at it on an annual basis for all the machines that each of these parts require. By generating all of this data across a large group of parts, we can then start to add up and quantify the actual capacity requirements on a specific machine that these parts would have. So if these parts were to be made in the process selected, we would want to ensure that we or our suppliers had about 1,300 hours of capacity, as you can see on the bottom of the screen where the totals column is, available on an 800 kilonewton bend brake machine. If we see this amount of time or capacity as a limiting factor to this package of parts, whether it is internally or outsourced, we can eliminate select suppliers who may not be able to provide that capacity, investigate outsourcing select parts on this machine to eliminate capacity restrictions, and analyze additional processes that could be applied and then view that effect on should cost. So by adjusting routings or adjusting processes, we can evaluate the benefit of looking at a capacity restriction versus the effect that has on should cost. Possibly in another scenario, we have this 2,000 watt laser punch machine that we know is at full capacity internally. This package of parts requires about 95 hours on this 2,000 watt laser punch machine. So we can quickly see that this equipment will be unavailable using our internal data and start to investigate other low-cost options to fit within our capacity options. So if we had other laser punch machines, and that might be a little bit larger, we can determine what the effect of moving these parts to a larger machine or a different process would have on should cost, while understanding that the capacity requirements that those may have. Additional example here is maybe our 6,000 watt laser cut machine has the capacity available to manufacture these two parts that we have in this bid package, or this package of parts. But with the demand that we would require, we would be putting our machine over a threshold of capacity that we've set internally that we want to make sure we stay under. This risk of if there was downtime or something unexpected occurred would prevent us from delivering these parts on time. So when we see something, a situation like this, we can quickly adjust the equipment to alternative machines and attempt to eliminate that risk that would come to delivering on time, and continue to consider should cost throughout that entire evaluation. Finally, for data like this, you can summarize the entire bid package very quickly and include that data to ensure your suppliers have all of the available capacity that is required. So the data that is circled in the red box on the bottom would be the total hours of capacity needed on each machine for each part to make all of the 14 parts inside of this bid package. By providing this data as clearly as possible, you and your supplier can ensure that you're on the same page with expectations and requirements upfront to reduce the risk of your parts not being delivered on time. And by leveraging aPriori's ability to calculate usable cycle times across multiple machines on specific parts, the ability to gather data around capacity restrictions will help all parties involved understand expectations and ensure parts can be delivered on time using the optimal processes for should cost. The final portion of this presentation that I want to cover is on the on capital expenditure analysis. So being able to look at compare that capacity with the capital expenditure required and try to understand whether or not you can justify these capital expenditures within your plant. So with the capacity determinations we just made, discussed in the prior slides per part, you can generate this data across an entire plant to begin to investigate machine investments and justify capital expenditures. So with this data, you can quickly add up all the parts within your plant across all the different machines and quantify the number of machines that would be required to make those parts across your plant. By comparing this data to your internal equipment, you can determine if the machines that you have can produce all the parts that you are planning. This data can help you identify opportunities to purchase either additional equipment, whether that be an additional machine of a specific machine type, or invest in new capabilities that could create new processes and unlock some should costs, that some of the cheapest options for should cost. As new products come into the fold in your plant, you can evaluate where they would fit into your plant's capacity needs as a whole and decide whether select parts should be made in-house or outsourced from suppliers to eliminate risk and ensure on-time delivery. So using aPriori's breadth of data, you can quickly perform an ROI investigation to understand how the cost of that new machine and any tooling along with it for specific parts compares to the contribution margin for those parts, determining whether you want to maybe insource or outsource a specific type of parts. So with aPriori, you can cost all parts across a select site in your organization with the actual equipment you have on the plant. By putting those machines into your specific digital factories, you can actually see some valuable and real world information regarding your capacity and eventually your capital expenditures. By generating this data, you can visualize the capacity and the capabilities that you are required to create all the parts you need to in your plant. And by comparing this capacity needed to the capacity that's available, you can understand where your gaps are from a capacity perspective. And these pieces of data can help guide you to vital decisions within your organization, which will drive to evaluating machine investments or make versus buy decisions. Where opportunities to purchase new equipment to satisfy your capacity demands exist, you can generate ROI investigations to justify these capital expenditures. And by understanding annual contribution margins and the investment requirements with aPriori data, you can quantify how long it would take to return your investment on that specific machine. And based on internal requirements for ROI justification, you can generate these internal justifications for large scale investment projects. And in scenarios where you may be over the capacity constraints that you have internally, but possibly the ROI justification does not exist for ordering or purchasing a new machine, this data may steer you in the direction of evaluating make versus buy decisions for select parts. You can effectively select parts to reduce your capacity constraints and begin to investigate sourcing those parts to efficiently organize your operations. So when you do run into scenarios where the justification isn't met, you can accurately pick parts and select programs that you may want to move and outsource to ensure that you can get the best price. So for this example, let's say you are in a scenario, and we're going to look at this one, that you are looking to understand more about how a new product family will fit into your current machine inventory and explore the need to add a new machine to the plant to ensure optimum equipment is available. To view an example report and the resulting data that can be generated in aPriori, I'm going to pull up and open up a hands-on demonstration inside of Cost Insight Reporting to ensure that you can see some of the data output we can create within these ad hoc reports. And from here, we will be able to talk through some of the power of our Cost Insight Reporting capabilities. So just give me 1 second. Okay. So the screen I have open right now is our Cost Insight Reporting tool where we can create ad hoc reports. And I've put together, similarly to reports for the other couple sections of this presentation, a presentation report for Cost Insight Capital Expenditure Analysis. And from here, I'm going to just walk kind of through the same justification, point out some of the same data that I have on the other reports, but to kind of see how Cost Insight Reporting would work. You can set filters and create variables to pull out this specific data and to generate new data points that may not exist right out of aPriori's out of the box capabilities. So for the capital expenditure analysis, what we can do here, and as I've spoken through, is what we would want to look at is your capacity percentage that is used for specific parts that are on specific machines, and compare that to the number of machines that are required based on your that machine's annual capacity capabilities, and then compare those numbers to see if you possibly either need to outsource or purchase a new machine. And along with that, take on the ability to view some of the investment data that we have as far as machine costs, tooling costs within aPriori, and compare those two numbers together, and eventually come up with the opportunity and investigation to understand if there is justification for a new machine. So for the data I have here, we have the process type and the machine specific machine name. So each of these parts is built or created on one of these specific machines. So all of these parts will be made on the 2-axis lathe machine here. And in the first column on each one of those parts, we will have a annual machine hours required. So the amount of hours that we require on that machine, whether it's the batch setup time, the cycle time, extrapolated times the annual volume, to understand how many hours that specific part requires. And on the bottom totals line, you can see a total for the all the parts that exist on that machine. So in the next column, we have our raw machine capacity. So based on the amount of hours a day, the amount of shifts per day, the amount of working days per year, and the amount of availability and uptime for that specific machine, we can calculate that raw machine annual capacity in hours. So based on those two numbers, we can determine the amount of capacity that is utilized for each specific part, as well as the amount of capacity on that specific machine type that we have utilized. So for this 2-axis lathe, we have about 11% capacity used with these 4 parts. So if we were to be bringing in new parts or adding on a couple new projects that would go to the 2-axis lathe machine, you can add those in and see if you have available capacity left over afterwards. Now, what we would do with the machines required is the same as the capacity constraints. So if we had 200% capacity and we required 2 machines, what we would look at is our internal capabilities and evaluate, okay, do we have 1 machine, 2 machines, 3 machines, and would this data lend us to needing to purchase an additional machine that we do not currently have access to? Or maybe we were just slightly over the capacity and we needed a little bit more than 1 machine. What we could do is pick parts off of this list that we would want to investigate for outsourcing to ensure we stay under our internal machine capacities. And the second portion of this, so once we have the number of machines capacity required, we can start to look at some of the capital expenditures that we would need to make for a new machine. So here we have our total machine process cost and our total capital outlay. So our total capital outlay will be the amount of that machine cost that this specific part would take up. And then we would also have a tooling and NRE cost. So that tooling cost would be specific for this part. And the total amortizable machine cost is that capacity percentage. So when you do add those two numbers together, you're getting a total capital outlay on that specific part, which then can be added up to your total capital investment that is required for the group of parts under that specific machine type. And based off of entering in margins and contributions for that specific part, such as SG&A and actual profit margin, you can begin to multiply that per part profit margin by an annual volume to try to determine the amount of contribution for that specific part type, to evaluate whether your contribution margin that you're getting from all the specific parts outweighs your total capital outlay, or the total capital outlay that would be required to invest in an additional machine. So by evaluating your capacity and understanding your capacity requirements here, you can analyze whether you need to outsource some new components or possibly invest in a new machine. And from that machine investment, you can utilize information stored within aPriori to try to investigate and run through ROI calculations to determine if investing in that new machine would be something that would be beneficial and feasible for your organization. Okay. So that's all I wanted to walk through in the cost insight reporting. So back to the slides itself. That is all I wanted to cover in today's session. So going through the material, usage analysis and risk planning, capacity risk planning, and starting to talk through quick options for investigating your capital expenditure analysis and attempting to utilize the a priori data that we have built into the tool and all the part data you're generating from your new parts to determine whether or not you need to invest in new machines. So at this time, I'd like to take a couple minutes to respond to any questions that come up. So the Q&A panel on the website should still be open. So there's still time to enter a question in the last couple minutes here if anything comes up. I'm not sure if I see any questions coming through.
Yeah, we just have one question, Evan,
Okay.
from the Zoom meeting from Michael. There are a couple questions, two-part question. It's using capacity analysis that you showed, can we evaluate the effect of changing batch size or lot sizes and be able to quantify the impact of an increasing or decreasing setup time based upon that?
Yeah, absolutely. For evaluating lot sizes, that's definitely something you can do to adjust some of the a priori data and create different scenarios that live inside of your a priori database to evaluate all those different lot sizes. And based off of that, you will have different batch setup times and different cycle times associated with each of those parts, which would then correlate into an adjustment in that capacity restriction. So as long as you evaluate those parts properly and set up the cost properly and make all the right assumptions within your part, you can definitely take a look at how the effect or how the change in capacity would result from changing those lot sizes pretty quickly within a priori. And it would definitely be something that would be pretty simple and easy to investigate in the same way I'd set up those reports.
Definitely. Yeah, and then kind of a second part of that question is just around those capacity risk planning reports. If that's a standard report, I think you highlighted it briefly, but in terms of folks setting up that report on their own.
Yeah, so the capacity risk planning report that I had showed is not something that's currently an out-of-the-box report, but all of that data does exist out of the box within a priori. So it's something that we could build very quickly within the ad hoc editor on the cost insight reporting page. So if it was definitely something you're interested in, feel free to reach out to me or anybody else that you work with at a priori, and they could definitely work with getting that set up for you and give you a hand in pulling those variables together, because I know that's something that we do have. I also know on our support site there should be some material that refers to a very similar report. And if you shoot me an email, I'll pull my email up now. It's on the next slide. I could likely send you a link to that page on our support website, which will show some of the variables you have there and setting up that report on your own. And I think that does exist off the top of my head, so we can definitely take a look at that. I think that's all I have today. So thank you everybody for joining into the session. And this is the end of the session. So have a great day and enjoy the rest of the sessions that you do join through the Cost Insight Conference.